Chapter 5. The Execution. Summer became autumn, and the love between Will and Elena was the strongest that had ever been felt. So powerful were these feelings, Will's thirst for revenge no longer seemed so important. All he could think of was his future bride. The wedding preparations had all been made. The village square was filled with colorful decorations, and a huge supply of wine stood ready to flow between countless smiling lips. It was the night before the wedding. The next day, the couple would at long last share the name of Goldstone. In keeping with tradition, Will celebrated with the friends he had made while elsewhere. Delena celebrated with hers. Spirits were high in the tavern, as Delena's lifelong dream was about to come true. However, the cheers soon faded when the tavern doors swung open and two of Drake's men entered. Why such happiness? Is someone getting married? Delena nodded nervously. Well, I must say, you've picked a nice time of year for it. Isn't that right, Roji? Yeah. The tavern was as silent as a grave. For a moment, the men looked as if they were about to leave, and Elena breathed a sigh of relief. But they suddenly grabbed her, and she let out a cry. What are you doing? Well, marriage is a very big step. You'd agree, Roji? The biggest, Garn. And so, if you're going to take that step, it's best to be sure about your future husband. Oh, I'm sure. How can you be when you've not looked at the other possibilities? What do you mean? Well, for a start, there's our boss, your king. He's always had an eye for beauty. And the power to take it, Delena screamed as the men dragged her from the tavern. King Drake stood alone in the center of his throne room. Dressed in studded black leather and a long cape, he was indeed a frightening figure, although right now, he was very bored. The doors to the throne room opened, and one of his men entered. What is it, Garn? Why do you disturb me? I have a present for your majesty. A present? It's not my birthday. Well, I heard that you were bored, and anyway, you're the king. His Majesty can have a birthday whenever he wants. Very well. What is this present? Bring her in, Roj. Delena was led into the dark, echoing throne room. Oh, yes. Happy birthday to me indeed. He advanced upon the terrified girl. What is your name, young lady? Delena. Delena, a fitting name for such a beautiful creature. Now that you're within the walls of my dark fortress, tell me, Delena, is it how you imagined it to be? Worse. I suppose it could do with a woman's touch. And what of me? How do I make you feel? Delena could say nothing. Lost for words? Well, I know how you make me feel. Drake began stroking her hair, and she closed her eyes in terror and disgust. Finding new courage, Delena opened her eyes and spat in Drake's face. I'd sooner be dead than live a life with you. Drake, his face frozen with surprise, blinked his eyes. He wiped his face clean and smiled. Very well, my dear. Your wish is my command. Take her away, Raj. Delena was led quickly to an even less pleasant part of the fortress, while Drake walked over to Garn, who he struck with the back of his hand. What sort of present do you call that? The sun had risen, and as Will happily made his way to the village square, he saw that a large crowd had gathered. He put his hand on a stranger's shoulder and smiled. "I didn't expect quite so many people at my wedding." "We're not here for a wedding. It's a public execution." Will was horrified. "An execution? Why would you come to watch such a thing?" "We had to. It's by royal command." Suddenly, a terrible scream rang out, and Will's blood ran cold. Something about the voice sounded familiar. He pushed his way to the front of the crowd and fell to his knees when he saw Delena, tied to a post with a sword through her heart. He began to shiver, and he cried like a wounded animal. His voice then became a tremendous howl of rage and agony. He looked around for a weapon with which to kill the executioner and guards. Just then, his headband began to throb, and he heard a voice in his head. It sounded like Kylan. "Do not take your revenge yet. If you try, you will surely fail. Leave Galabas and walk north." Confused, Will touched the headband with his finger. "If this is destiny, Kylan, I don't like it one bit." Chapter 6. Ready to meet destiny. Unable to think of anything other than Delena's death, Will continued his walk through the wilderness. He had been walking for almost a week now, and the exhausted young man had no idea of where he was going. Eventually, he decided that he could walk no further, so he sat down against a large rock. Opposite him was a cave. As Will stared into the blackness within, he began hearing tiny, high-pitched noises, like echoing musical whispers, like something out of a dream. Once more, the band around his head started to throb, this time causing some pain. He felt dizzy, and his eyes were suddenly forced shut. He thought he was falling asleep, and that he was about to meet his most troubled dream in years. However, Will was not dreaming. Will was nowhere. The voice spoke again. It was definitely Kylan. "I once talked about destiny. I did not tell you about your own because the time was not right." "What do you mean, Kylan?" "Will, the ancient scrolls of Dazan tell of much, not only of history, but of the future as well. King Dedrag has been ruling and ruining our world for far too long. He has lived longer than any man, and he has used his time for one purpose: the creation of misery. Dazan sent me into the world, not to destroy Dedrag, but to find and guide the one who will. That man is you. I thought as much when I first saw the mark on your chest. Since you left me, events have continued to happen as is written in the scrolls. Are you telling me that you knew Delena would be killed? Of course. I could not tell you because it would have influenced your actions. Now you must fulfill your destiny, driven by vengeance and armed by Dazan. In that cave, you will find Dazan's sword and shield. They have lain hidden in there for centuries, surrounded by a lake of fire, waiting to be taken by their rightful owner. What if the wrong man tried to take them? That man would surely die. So what if I'm not the one? Have faith in my judgment. Have faith in yourself. You will find your mark on the shield, a crescent moon and a crystal of pure gold. There's no such thing as a golden crystal. It is unique. It is the sun crystal, the most powerful of all those created by Dazan. It will light up the world in our most desperate hour. The crescent moon will free the power of the sun, and victory will be yours. People will call you savior. People will call you king. Enter the cave, Will Goldstone. Take your weapons and free the world from the shadow of Dreg. As Kylan's voice faded, Will opened his eyes. Everything seemed normal again, except for the fact that it was now night. I closed my eyes when the sun was in the sky. Now the moon is in its place. Will spent a long time thinking about all that Kylan had said. He grew worried as he thought about the lake of fire. What if Kylan is wrong about me? I will burn alive. After a while, he realized that he had to take the risk. Kylan told me to free the world from the shadow of Dreg. I have to try. I have to find out if I'm the one who can make a difference. I'd rather burn trying to beat that monster than live in a world where he is king. Will stroked his birthmark as if it were a good luck charm. He stood, breathing heavily, in the mouth of the cave. The moment seemed to last forever. I must have faith in myself. I must have faith in Kylan. I must have faith in Dazan. With that thought firmly in mind, Will took a step forward. Chapter 7. The Fight Begins. Will made his way through a narrow passage. With each step came more light, fierce orange light, and the heat continued to increase. The passage led into a huge cavern filled with hissing lava. The lava was so hot, Will could feel his face beginning to blister. Staring across the fiery lake, he saw a small rocky mound in the center. The only way it could be reached was by a path of stepping stones. Some of these stones lay very far apart, and some looked too small for a man to stand on. Will's clothes helped protect his skin from the intense heat of the lava, but he knew that he might pass out if he became too hot. To pass out now would mean certain death, so he removed most of his sweat-soaked clothes, then placed a cautious foot on the first of the stepping stones. He found that he could balance on the first stone, but as he stepped onto the next and the next, he discovered that it was becoming harder and harder to keep his balance. As he stood amidst the swirling, bubbling lake of death, he realized that it would be safer for him to run across. He took a deep breath and ran towards the center of the cavern, and though he nearly fell twice, he made it safely to the weapons. Will examined the weapons. They were the finest that he had ever seen. He waved the sword high in the air so that he could feel its weight. He was even more impressed when he picked up the shield. The crescent moon shone in the light of the lava, while the crystal in the center was as golden as Kylan had described. Special weapons indeed. They could make any man invincible. But only one man shall hold them, and that man is me. Now I'll find out for sure. I wasn't carrying anything when I came across, so the real test will be whether I can get out of here. With the shield on his arm and the sword held high, Will began to run. Badly burned but excited and proud like never before, Will stepped out of the cave and into the cool night air. Now I shall be able to make a difference. I shall avenge the deaths of my parents and my one true love. I'll be at the dark fortress in about 7 days. Will's voice echoed, filled with rage. Enjoy life while you can, Dreg. You have only 7 days of it left. A week had gone by. Will was walking through the forest that surrounded Galabus when he saw a young woman tied to a huge oak tree. 2 of Dreg's men were now advancing upon her with flaming torches. One of them burned her arm, but she did not scream. even though her eyes were filled with tears. How can men enjoy such cruelty? Thought Will as he crept silently towards the torturers. The other man was about to burn the woman when Will suddenly attacked him. He struck the man with his shield, knocking him unconscious, and killed the other with his sword. He placed his weapons on the ground and began untying the woman. "Don't worry, it's over. I'll take you to your home." The woman punched Will in the face and yelled, "You fool, you've ruined the endurance test! I was supposed to be joining Drake's army tomorrow. How long will I have to wait now?" Will didn't know what to say. Just then, he saw that the man he had knocked out was now standing again and was reaching for his sword. Will went to pick up his magic weapons, but to his amazement, he found that they had disappeared. The woman stood behind him, holding a large, heavy branch above his head. She hit Will on the head with it, and he fell to the ground. Will woke up in a dark, damp dungeon. He sat up quickly when he noticed a large rat near his face. "Good evening." The voice came from a heavily built man with a horribly scarred face, who sat chained to the wall opposite Will. "Which do you want first, the good news or the bad news?" The bad news." "Well, the bad news is that we're going to be executed tomorrow." "What's the good news?" "You're awake in time for dinner." Chapter 8. Imprisoned. "Here you are, scum." The jailer brought in 2 bowls of awful-smelling food, which he put in front of the prisoners. "Enjoy it. It's the last food you'll ever eat." You forgot the salt." The jailer turned to the scarred man angrily. "Don't try to be funny, Shivan. In fact, don't talk. Eat that slop and that is all. If I hear you talk again, I'll cut your tongue out." With that, the jailer left the dungeon and locked the door. Will and Shivan began talking again, but very quietly, so as not to annoy the jailer. Actually, this food would taste better without the use of a tongue. Will nodded in agreement. "So who are you, Shivan?" "Up until yesterday, I was General Shivan. I had been General Shivan for more than 4 years. I served Drake more loyally than any other man, and now I've ended up in here. Another lamb for the slaughter." "Had you made him angry?" "No, I'd done nothing. It seems that Drake often decides to sacrifice his most valuable men. I only found that out yesterday." "Why would he do such a thing?" "Well, for one thing, he thinks that executing someone so important will make his God even more pleased with him. And for another, it means that he'll always be in command of young, athletic generals, because none of us have the chance to grow old. But I think that there's another reason. I think he does it to make sure that no one powerful will ever betray him. They'll be dead before they can even think about doing so." "Who is this God you spoke of?" "Scareth the Destroyer, Lord of chaos, of suffering, and of all black thoughts." "Do you worship him?" "I used to." "When did you stop?" "Yesterday." Shivan went on to tell Will all about the following day's execution of the traitors that was to take place, and although his cellmate certainly seemed familiar, never once did Will recognize him as the man he saw fighting with his mother all those years ago. He didn't know that it was this man's knife that finally cut her throat. nor did he realize that the scars were caused by the hot broth his mother had thrown on his face. Eventually, the conversation switched to Dreg himself and the secret of his power. This made Will very curious, and Siobhan very excited. His voice grew louder with each sentence. King Dreg wears a medallion around his neck. It was given to him by a sorceress called Vera. He put it on when he was 40 years old, and he has remained at that age ever since. That was over 100 years ago. If the medallion is removed, his strength will leave him, and he will melt away. Without that medallion, the mighty Dreg is nothing. At that moment, the jailer returned. He looked furious. I told you, didn't I? No more noise, I said. Well, let's hear how loud you can be with a mouthful of blood. He walked towards Siobhan with a sharp, rusty knife. Suddenly, Will threw his food bowl across the dungeon, hitting the jailer's head. The jailer spun round in pain and was about to make a move towards Will when Siobhan leapt to his feet, wrapped his arm around the jailer's neck, and broke it with a terrible snapping sound. The jailer's lifeless body slid to the floor. You wanted peace and quiet. You've got peace and quiet. Quick, Siobhan, throw me his knife. The knife flew through the air and landed at Will's feet. He picked it up and tried to break his chain with it. What are you doing? Well, you know what they say about a chain? No, what do they say? It's only as strong as its weakest link. Once Will had managed to break his chain, he freed Siobhan. We have to get hold of that medallion. Yes, it's time it was worn by someone else. No, it must be destroyed. And then our world will finally be at peace. Will and Siobhan left the dungeon in silence. They were about to walk down the corridor when a hand touched Will's shoulder, causing him quite a fright. He turned round quickly and was both relieved and surprised to see Kylan. The wizard stood smiling as he held out Will's magic weapons. I thought you might need these. Chapter 9. Out to kill the tyrant. Kylan, how did you get into the dark fortress? Do you expect me to give away all my secrets? And my weapons, where did you find them? In the forest where you left them. I took them when you were trying to rescue that strange young woman. How could you have taken them? You weren't even there. Oh, I was there. You simply couldn't see me. So if you were there all along, why didn't you help me? I did. By letting me get knocked unconscious? You wanted to get into the dark fortress, didn't you? Yes. Well, you're here. It really was the simplest way in. Now, you must do what you were born to do. Take your shield, take your sword, and get rid of that evil tyrant. Siobhan was impressed. Are you really Kylan? I mean, the Kylan? I am indeed. I never expected to meet you. I thought you were a myth. It's understandable. So now we're a team, eh, Will? Siobhan, Goldstone, and the most powerful magician in history. Not quite. You see, I've already done more than I'm supposed to. Are you leaving, Kylan? Of course. The rest is up to you, and you alone. Don't worry, Will. I shall be watching. Wait! Kylan! Before Will could say any more, Kylan had disappeared. Having realized that someone was escaping, the prisoners in the other cells cried out to be set free. Please, take us with you. We can't. Not yet. That's right. If we fail, and Drake finds out that we've all been trying to escape, he'll make the execution as painful as he can. Siobhan, where will we find him? The throne room. It's this way, come on. Drake's silver crown reflected the light of countless black candles. He sat upon his throne, discussing the following day's celebrations with his new general, a young man called Tychon. How many traitors do I have in the dungeons below? Including Siobhan and the young man caught in the forest, we have 23 prisoners. Drake shook his head. There must be more, Tychon. What do you mean, Your Majesty? I mean there are many more disloyal people to be punished. The day of Scarith is the day traitors are punished. The medallion that witch gave me says that not all traitors have been arrested. And for that, I want them all caught. Go forth into Galabas, Tychon. Bring me as many as you can find. Tychon nodded and left the throne room, leaving Drake alone to dream of death. Will and Siobhan had heard everything, as they had been hiding below one of the flights of steps that led into the throne room. They both whispered to each other. How quiet can you be, Siobhan? Like a mouse. Good. We have to catch Drake by surprise. Now, can you get across to them steps over there without being seen? Definitely. Then make your way over, but remember, be quiet. What are you going to do? I'm going to creep up on him from this side, and you'll do the same from the other side, so when we attack, he won't know which of us to try killing first. Understand? To the last letter. Then go and be careful. Siobhan moved backwards through a small doorway. It led into a corridor that was parallel to 3 sides of the throne room. He moved slowly along the corridor and eventually passed through another small doorway. He was now beneath the other flight of steps and was deep in thought. This is it. Drake will soon be dead, and then I can take Vera's medallion for myself. But what if we fail? He'll have me chopped into fish bait. Oh well, he was going to kill me anyway. It's just that we would stand more of a chance if that wizard hadn't left. An idea suddenly struck him. Although I could help save his life, then I'd be back in his army, back in a position of power. Who knows? He might even execute that Tychon instead of me. I wish I knew what to do. Will stepped silently from his hiding place and crept towards his target. His movements were like those of a cat and just as silent, so he was able to get right next to Drake without being seen or heard for an instant. He held his magic sword high. Just then, Siobhan decided what he would do. With not much time to think about his options, he decided that his old life was better than no life at all. With a single shout, he gave away both his own and Will's presents. "Look out, Your Majesty!" Drake looked quickly at Siobhan, then at Will, and with a swift, sudden movement, he grabbed the young adventurer by the throat. "What are you doing here, Siobhan? And who is this creature? We shared the same dungeon and escaped together. It's lucky for you that I'm out of there, as I soon found out that he planned to kill you." As if he'd achieved much. "Is this true, young man? Are you an assassin?" Drake tightened his grip, making Will choke. "No, no, Your Majesty. I'm as loyal to you as your new general." "But you look like an assassin. You are armed. Why are you armed?" At first, Will couldn't think of what to say. He hadn't expected to be having this conversation, and on top of that, He was finding it harder to breathe by the second. Then a suitable lie came to mind. "King Drake, I made these weapons for you." Drake released his grip, and Will fell to his knees. "Speak. Make it interesting, at least." "Your Majesty, I am a maker of weapons, and I have spent many months preparing this shield and this sword. I came to offer you these weapons so that on the day of Scarith you can carry the finest shield and hold the finest sword." Drake thought about what Will had said. "Why should I need your weapons? My own have proved more powerful than any man's, time and time again." "Yes, but these are special. They are made of a brand new metal. Believe me when I say that they are indeed the best. I will show you if you let me." "What do you mean?" "Let us test these weapons against your own. If I am wrong, then I will gladly die for wasting your time." "Very well. If you are telling the truth, you will die. If you are lying, you will still die. As for you, Siobhan, if I find that you are lying, your death will be the slowest of all." Chapter 10. The Confrontation. Drake's men gathered round as their king led Will into the fortress's courtyard. They laughed at Siobhan when Drake made him kneel with his head on a chopping block. "You can watch the fight from here, Siobhan." Drake passed Will his weapons, then picked up his own. It was to be a difficult fight, as there wasn't much light. The night sky was filled with clouds that hid the moon, and flaming torches created shadows that could fool the eye. "Scarith will smile tonight. I'm sending him your soul now, to whet his appetite for tomorrow's feast." The crowd began chanting as the two swords clashed. Swords struck shields again and again, until Drake's shield struck Will in the face, causing him to drop his weapons and fall. Will looked up at Drake's sword as it came towards him. He didn't have time to pick up his weapons, so he rolled out of the way, then jumped to his feet. Drake was really enjoying himself. He attacked his unarmed opponent, but Will avoided death with the help of the martial arts Kylan had taught him. Whenever Drake tried stabbing him, he moved out of the way with incredible speed. Will grabbed a torch and threw it at Drake. He managed to pick up his sword, and the fight continued. "I think you lied to me, young one. I think you do intend to kill me." "I do, and I will. You've taken everything from me. It's time for you to give something in return, your life." Will and Drake fought for quite some time, but Will soon became tired. Once again, Drake was able to knock him over, and he stood over him with his sword pointing upwards into the night sky. "Your life is at an end, boy." Will found his shield and hid beneath it. Suddenly, the clouds in the sky drifted apart, revealing the moon, a crescent moon. Its light shone directly into the crystal on Will's shield. A beam of brilliant light shot out of the sun crystal and straight into Drake's eyes. The king, blinded by the light, couldn't see Will getting to his feet. Will rushed over to Drake and stabbed him with the sword of Dazan. He removed the medallion, threw it to the ground, and crushed it with his foot. The king howled in agony as the years caught up with him. He grew weaker and older, until his head was just a screaming skull. Finally, all that remained were his clothes, which were filled with dust. The shocked crowd grew very angry, and they began to close in on Will. However, they were soon beaten by Drake's prisoners, who had been surprised to find themselves mysteriously freed. Tychon and his men were now locked in the dungeons instead. Will soon realized that it must have been the work of Kylan. The next day, the people of Galabus gathered at the fortress, having heard the news of Deidrag's death. The people cheered and chanted the name Goldstone, and Will was presented with Deidrag's crown. He put the crown under his arm and spoke to the crowd. "My friends, we are finally free. I will be glad to be your king, but I will not rule you. You must rule your own lives, rule them well, and help peace prevail forever. I have lost much, and now want to spend some time alone. I will soon be leaving to live a simple, quiet life, but before I go, I shall perform one royal deed. In honor of my one true love, let this world of ours be given a new name. From this day forward, it shall be known as Delenia." Meanwhile, in a faraway cave, an old wizard smiled the proudest smile of all. "Why didn't he want to live as a king, grandfather?" "Because he realized that rulers don't always choose what is right for the people. His world had suffered for a long time because of a king. I think he was afraid of becoming like Drake." "Oh, that would never have happened. He was a good man." "I agree. But he didn't want to take that chance. So he became king, and then went off to live in the wilderness." William and Howard heard a car pull up in the snow outside. "Oh, your parents are here, William. Great. I can't wait to tell them about everything that happened." "Do you mean our walks, the fishing, the snowmen? Or do you mean what happened in the story?" "All of it." "It's been a terrific week, grandfather." Howard opened the front door and greeted William's parents. "Hello, Adam. Hello, Liana. Did you have much trouble getting here?" "Not really, Howard." "Did you have trouble keeping William away from the TV, Dad?" "You know, he hardly ever noticed it was there.